and Mark Bichachi this morning just to, review the papers and also look at what kind of a week we have had before. So thank you, Ruth, and thank you, Mark, for joining us this morning. All right, we'll go straight to the dailies, and let's start off with the Standard, where we have the headline, "Why Doctors Are Afraid for Kenya." Now, this is an exclusive interview that was done with doctors and nurses leading the war against the pandemic at Mbagathi Isolation Unit, and they paint a grim picture for the country as COVID-19 cases shoot up by 29, bringing the total to 110. Yesterday, again, being one of the biggest numbers that we have had so far, actually the biggest that we've had announced at one time within 24 hours. But this, again, of course, is because of mass testing that has been taking place. Remember, there's 2,000 people who are in quarantine who have been kept away, and as a result, that's where government has concentrated on their testing. Let me start with you, Mark, on this particular issue where doctors on the front line are a worried lot.
Well, they have to be. If you look at the results from across the world, China, Italy, even the United States of America, you know that first responders, the doctors that are on the front line, are likely to be infected. That's simply because this particular disease is airborne. It is a disease that is highly contagious, but also it is due to the lack of personal protective clothing, which has lacked not only in Kenya, but in a lot of the world. And remember, much of this clothing was created to be a single use, so it's not something that's supposed to be rewashed and reused. So the quantities worldwide are declining. So there is cause to worry. Secondly, there's been talk that they're saying that they're not particularly trained. That's not accurate. The training, as the CS said, is specific to how to handle COVID-19, and we've not had enough time, and the world has not had enough time to train every medical professional in this. So is their concern justified? Yes, it is. The infectious rate among first responders is quite high, but that does not mean that the things are so dire in Kenya, because right now, where the numbers stand, we have enough personnel and enough equipment to handle any issues that may happen, but who knows what may happen in later days.
All right, and Ruth, part of the worry for the doctors is that, first of all, if we look at this particular article, apparently the doctors are working on 12-hour shifts, then you have nurses working for 8-hour shifts, and they've raised the concern that even the numbers of doctors that they have in the isolation centers is wanting. Of course, this putting them at risk, number one, but secondly, also working them, beyond what they really ought to be working at a time like this.
Yes, at that point is where I'd like to start by disagreeing with Mark Bichachi when he says that we might have enough capacity. Because clearly, if doctors are working 12-hour shifts, you can imagine, God forbid, if the numbers go up. And as we are told right now, the numbers seem to be increasing each and every other day. So I think capacity is a big question. Remember that the United States at some point put out an advert saying that if you're a nurse, if you're a doctor, and they simply seemed to be targeting developing countries such as Kenya and other countries. So I think I'm glad that they put it out after we had stopped flights from Kenya to the rest of the world, meaning that the capacity of nurses that we do have right now, who are not necessarily on the field, can now go to the field in case things get worse. And I think the other concern that they have highlighted is that there's very little space within the isolation center, like very little space between one bed to the other, as opposed to the previous, I think previous, is it typhoid or whatever, one of those diseases that we once dealt with as a country, the 18-bed capacity that is at Kenyatta National Hospital. So the concern that the space between one bed to the next is very limited is something that we should worry about. And over and above, I think so far we have done the best that we could, but I still believe that there is room for improvement, there is room to do better, there is room to expand even more hospitals beyond just the hospitals that are at what we would like to call the epicenters of the pandemic. Because remember, much as we are told that persons who are currently reporting positive are the ones who are being tested in quarantine centers, we should not forget that there was a whole lot of Kenyans who, or rather of citizens or people living in the country who jetted in before the official quarantine centers had been put up and they were told to quarantine themselves. So I do believe that with more contact tracing, we might end up having a slightly higher number than we do now, and the country needs to be prepared. And I like the fact that the government said that now they will start hiring nurses and doctors. Hopefully that with that increased capacity, the shifts can become lesser, and also with the directive that we should now start producing our own masks and protective gear, that the nurses will feel a bit more safe.
All right. I don't know if we're able to just look at the headline of the Daily Nation and maybe just show it to those at home, particularly if you've not managed to get your newspaper, because the picture that is there for me is one that almost underscores what the CS for Health and the headline. The headline on the Daily Nation is "Stop Dancing with Death." And right below that, there is a picture of Kenyans who I guess were coming from work and they were queuing for matatus. But talk about social distancing. It's literally, this is like a picture that was taken a year ago when, COVID-19 was not anything that we had, thought about or even had the word social distancing. Mark, it looks like the CS has a point when he says we are, as Kenyans, not serious. But then again, what is expected from Kenyans, given that, we have no backup as a country? It seems like we have no way of sustaining ourselves if people don't go to work.
The truth of the matter is it's a catch-22, and it's a catch-22 in regards to two things. Number one, in regards to the economics and in regards to the danger that portends within COVID-19. Let me put it in perspective. Yesterday, a lady calls me and she tells me, listen, I'm unable to go to work. How am I going to feed my kids? And that's a clear and present danger, not only for the lower cadre of Kenyan society. If you look at much of what we define as the middle class, and these are people who earn 80,000 shillings, if you ask them how much they have in savings if they got fired today, they'll tell you maximum 2 months, and they cannot survive beyond that. So the question has to be asked is, how do we deal with the economics of COVID-19? But that does not give an excuse for no social distancing. I do not understand why people will say I cannot keep 1.5 meters, 2 meters between me and the next person simply because I'm trying to make money. That is inexcusable. We can excuse having to go to work. We can excuse having to go to make that bread that you need to feed your kids. But we need to get serious to the point to understand that this thing is not playing around, that if we are going to spend time together in groups of 3s and 4s or 10s in queues as we are seeing, then it's going to be very, very dangerous. I like what supermarkets are doing in the sense that you can see when people are queuing, they're actually keeping distance. But I think supermarkets need to go a bit further and determine how many people can be in the supermarket at any given time, because we do need to take this contagion seriously. We need to take the threat seriously. And let me just tell Kenyans that the 100 are confirmed cases, which means that those who are going to be tested again today, because remember it's contact tracing, there's a likelihood again that there's a number out there. So the truth of the matter, as the CS said yesterday, things are looking thick for this country, and I think we better put on our seatbelts, hunker down, get home, and figure out how we're going to get through this. But the economics of it all, let me just say this. For the United States, just as it was for China and it will be for Kenya, this is going to be a tough ride.
And Ruth, just to read the statement that was read by the CS yesterday, or rather he said, fellow Kenyans, I do not want to scare you, but the figures I just read to you, which of course now we are at 110 confirmed cases, that's as yesterday, it's important to note that the virus does not move on itself. The other thing that he said is that we better get used to staying home, because this might be where we are headed, and this could be taken as a hint for a lockdown. Are we ready for a lockdown?
Well, first and foremost, I think that there's a lot of contradiction when we are told to stay home, and yet we are told that, you can go to work during the day and then get back to, be done by work, with work at around 4 p.m. and get home by 7 p.m. Meaning that even as we are saying stay at home, and yet we still have people going to work. It's a directive that doesn't seem to make sense for many people, because for employers, you know, when you say stay at home, what measures are you putting in place to ensure that as the employees are at home, even the employers' interests are taken care of? So I think when we talk about a lockdown, I mean, stay at home and then still telling us, you know, go to work, but make sure by 4 p.m. you're done, and then 7 p.m. you're in the house, meaning that, and as we are told that the virus does not spread on its own, it spreads by people movement. Then if we are really staying at home, let us just all stay at home. And if we are truly all staying at home, then what measures are we putting in place? And that's where the question for are we really ready for a lockdown comes in. I think the biggest worry for Kenyans right now is that if we go to a lockdown, some of the biggest questions we have is, do we have enough food supply? I haven't seen that question answered effectively or properly to the extent where Kenyans would feel that, yes, indeed, we can go for a lockdown. If we go for a lockdown, what becomes of businesses? And I think these are some of the questions that the government is trying to answer. We saw the president coming up with some of the measures that he thought at that point were fit to ensure that businesses will continue in case things get worse. But he also said that if need be, if these measures are not sufficient, then there would be need to revise them. This is the point where, before we get to that lockdown, business owners, you know, mama mbogas, boda riders, matatu owners need to tell us, do they feel that the measures the president released the other time are sufficient to cover us in case we go for a lockdown? I've seen other countries, for example, Rwanda, we saw over the headlines of some newspapers or, you know, news from their country that they had a proper system for distributing food. At the point when they locked down the country, they had proper food reserves. Uganda had proper food reserves. I remember the other day when I was going to buy some groceries, and the gentleman who sells the fruits was telling me that, you know, a great percentage of the food that they sell comes from Uganda, and now Uganda is on lockdown. So I'm asking myself, if the bananas we are eating, the green bananas that we are eating from here, come from Uganda, in case we go to a lockdown, do we have enough supply of food, you know? So that's a question, enough supply of food. How long will that lockdown last? Some have argued for, some have argued against. The arguments for are that let's just go for a lockdown, a quick lockdown, and be able to contain the virus and do tracing and get the people tested, do rapid testing, and then we can be able to contain it. But then there's no example of countries that have handled or are still handling this, that, you know, going for a lockdown will successfully get us to the point where now we are at 0 patients. Because look at Italy, they went for a lockdown and thought that by the end of, or by the beginning of April or end of May, they assumed they would be out of lockdown. The US also assumed that, you know, by Easter they'll be back to work. But now look, they're being told that possibly by June, that's when they should be thinking of things going back to normal. So what I'm saying is that there really isn't a proper argument as to whether we should go to lockdown or not. But what the question Kenyans have is that, will we have enough food? Do we have enough water? Are there delivery points for essential services? Have we put in place mechanisms to ensure that in case we are all at home, things are still moving and the economy does not collapse completely?
Okay, I want us to take a short break. Mark, when we come back, I'd like us to just paint a picture of a lockdown, because it looks like, the CS statement yesterday was the strongest hint so far that we could be heading for a lockdown. And it seems more of a matter of when than if. And as a result, I think it is good that Kenyans begin to prepare mentally and whatever other way that we can prepare for that lockdown. What does a lockdown mean? What does it look like? Are we prepared for it? That's what we'd like to look at when we come back. For now, we take a short break. Let's see you on the other side of the break.